Well, today is the long-awaited date, December 14th, when the Electoral College is to meet. For quite a while after the election, I was thinking to myself that, hey, this will be the big date that we'll have to wait to see, is Trump going to be able to turn things around? Is he going to be able to win in these courts in time and flip the electors in his favor and blah blah blah? And of course, that hasn't happened. But what's interesting today is that the Republicans, or I should say the Trump campaign, and their Republican electors have not given up. And as an expression of that, the pre-selected Trump electors in these various contested states, at least 3 that I know of, although it might be more at this point, it might be all 6, but at least Nevada, Georgia, and Pennsylvania, they have, come out and said, hey, we're casting our votes for Trump publicly. Now that means that in these 3 states there are competing slates of electors, and that's not a scenario that I totally, or that I thought was impossible by any means. It's something I've been talking about for a long time. But what I've been talking about, and what a lot of other people have been talking about when it comes to slates of competing electors, is that you have different state institutions designating different people to be electors. So, for example, 1876 is when this is the big. That was the big moment where this happened, where you had the state election commissions or whatever appointing electors for, I believe it was Hayes, and then you had the state legislatures in a bunch of states designate electors for Tilden, and so they all met, on the date specified for the Electoral College to vote. They cast their votes, and then they mailed it off to Washington. And what ended up happening is that that little envelope that they mailed in all their results in, a bunch of states had 2 envelopes coming in. And so it wasn't clear exactly whose electors should be recognized, which electors were the legitimate ones. And there was a chance that if the Trump campaign was able to get the state legislatures in enough states on their side, they could have also sent their own slate of competing electors in the same fashion, and then we would have had a contested election, which would have resulted in the election falling to the House, which would have to decide by state delegation. And that clearly is what they seem to be trying to do here. Except in this case, you don't have the state legislature coming in and positively asserting that they're going to appoint, these people, electors, to vote for Trump, or they're not coming in and saying that they're denying those Democrat electors and sort of removing them as, de-designating them. And so I'm unsure about the utility of this whole action. Now, what they're citing is the election of 1960. In Hawaii, and apparently in Hawaii, what happened was after Election Day, there was it was a bit unclear who won, but it looked like it was going to be Nixon, and so on the day in which the Electoral College met, the official sort of results were that Nixon won. So a bunch of electors, however many, probably only 3 electors, I would think, cast their votes for Nixon. But at the same time, the Kennedy electors also met to cast their votes. And the reason why they did this is because I guess Kennedy was challenging the results in Hawaii, and there was he wanted to make sure that his electors cast their ballots on Election Day, in the case that he actually was able to prevail in that challenge later on. And that's exactly what happened. If you look up, the election of 1960 today, you'll see that Kennedy ended up receiving the electoral votes from that state. And so I guess where I'm struggling today, because I don't like speaking on a topic when I don't 100% know the answers to the questions that I want to ask, if that makes sense. To me, parsing out the differences between what happened in 1960 versus what happened in 1876, it's a difficult question, because do these electors meeting and casting a vote, does it really, what does it signify? How is that different than the legislature coming in and appointing, and saying affirmatively, hey, we designate these electors for Donald Trump? Because the way that the Electoral College works today, from what I understand, is that ahead of time they pick electors for the Republican or the Democrat. And the reason why they do that is that you don't want electors, appointing electors to the Electoral College who might be not be faithful to the candidate that they're supposed to vote for. So they make sure that they essentially have supporters of that candidate who are appointed as electors, depending on who wins the the popular vote election in that state. And so going into the election, you have these two slates of electors in every state. And so in a way, they are preordained as electors, and whoever ends up winning the popular vote, that slate of electors is the one that is supposed to cast their vote on the actual day that the Electoral College meets. But so I guess what I don't understand, because it would be different in all these different states, because all of their laws are going to be written differently. What legal rights do the Republican slates of electors have to do this? Because obviously, if they're citing 1960, in 1960 it meant something. Because those votes ultimately were counted in 1960. Kennedy won those votes, even though at the time he was not the official winner when the Electoral College met in Hawaii. So the big question to me is that by these electors casting their votes, does that automatically make this a contested election? Is there a chance that the vice president cannot certify the results of the Electoral College if he has competing slates of electors from each state? At that point, would the only resolution then be to go to the House? Some people are arguing that, but you also have the problem of the constitutionally dubious law, which says that in order for an election to be contested, you have to have one member of the House and one member of the Senate object to a state's Electoral College vote, and then the House and the Senate have to disperse and debate it for a couple hours, and then they both have to vote on it. And then question is, do they both have to then vote a majority saying that the results are in dispute? It gets very murky at that point. But what they're doing here is they're showing that the Trump folks don't intend on giving up at this point. They are setting the stage so that this stuff can happen later on down the road. But it's as we get further down this road, the path becomes much less clear to me as to how things can play out. Now, interestingly enough, in Georgia, they have their own unique reasoning. The Republicans shared theirs, said that it was imperative that the Trump electors meet and to cast their votes, because that's essentially what allows the litigation to continue, at least under Georgia law. Because if there were no electors on this date that cast votes in favor of Trump, then the court could just dismiss whatever the election challenges are that are going on as moot, because the Electoral College already voted and they voted for Biden, so you can't challenge it anymore. But if there are competing slates, then you're able to challenge it. But I'm concerned less about the court stuff, keeping things alive in the courts, because it seems clear to me that the courts do not want to do much of anything in favor of the Trump people. To me, what really matters is how does this affect the joint session of Congress on January 6th? Because again, that is another avenue that I do not have much confidence in for their sake, because you do have a Democrat House, and on top of that, you've got a lot of Republicans in Congress who would be very happy to see Trump go. So I think it's very tall order to think that even the Senate would vote to put the results of any of these states in question. So it's getting tough at this point. And I don't mean tough for Trump. It's been tough the whole time for him. I mean it's getting tough to really understand where this could go. But I guess the important thing is, for me, is that the more questions are raised about this election, the better. And I'm glad to see them, however far they can take this, that they're going to take it to the end. Today was something that I was not expecting when I got up in the morning. I did not expect to hear that the Trump electors from these various states, met anyway and cast their ballots for Trump. And frankly, now that I think about it, I think that the vice president can go right around whatever that that law I was telling you about, because it was a statute, it was a matter of statute that there had to be an objection from the House and the Senate. I think that if the vice president has a problem himself, well, that law governs Congress challenging the vice president on certifying the vote. If the vice president himself, though, he has these 2 envelopes in his hands from these states. He looks at Georgia and says, I have these electors here that voted for Biden and these electors here that voted for Trump. He might just himself unilaterally put those states into question and throw the election to the House. He could do that, but again, as I was saying yesterday, I doubt that Pence is that bold, but I mean, he is a part of the executive branch, and it would be a betrayal of Trump that he probably couldn't recover from politically. In other words, if Trump really wants Pence to do that, I don't know how Pence could turn him down, because Pence does want to run for president in the future. Pence wants to be the president of the United States, or he wants to be the Republican candidate in 2024, assuming that Trump is not running in 2024. And so I don't see so in other words, if Trump wills it, I think that Pence might very well take the opportunity of these competing slates of electors as a good excuse to say, hey, I can't certify these results regardless of whether or not members of the House or the Senate object to it, and whether or not the House and the Senate, vote to put these results in dispute. The vice president himself might just do that, since he has the power, constitutionally, to certify the Electoral College vote. And as I've discussed many times in the past, then it goes to the House to vote by state delegation, which would probably result in a Trump victory. Now, again, this would be incredibly bold and would create an immense amount of chaos. So the question still remains, the question from yesterday, would Pence go through with this? And I would say that as of today, there is a higher chance that he would than yesterday. Yesterday, I thought that there was a very slim chance that he would do it. Today, I would say that there's a small chance that he would do it, but larger than yesterday, because now he has a little extra wiggle room. He has a bit more of reason, logically, to doubt these results. I think a very reasonable reason. Wait, is that proper English? Reasonable reason? Sounds redundant. So, anyway, I guess that's the big moral of the story today, is that I would keep your eye on Pence. I don't expect the courts to do much. I mean, there's some glimmers of hope here and there, but overall, I think the judiciary does not want to help out Trump. So now it's a question of Pence's political future. And again, of Trump's will. Trump's will, I think, is something that is pretty clear. Trump wants to remain president, and if he knows, if they talk to the White House counsel or whatever, and he tells him, hey, Pence could throw these states into dispute and give it to the House, I imagine that Trump would put a lot of pressure on Pence and make it clear to Pence that, hey, you can't just screw me out of my job and then expect me to let you win in 2024 or 2028. So I guess that's what we have to chew on for now. If you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.